Hello everyone. Welcome to the new episode of EBA Consulting Podcast. Today we have a pleasure to host Billy Shallow, who apart from leading numerous security improvement and airport optimization initiatives, has also created and is the manager for ACI's Smart Security Vision 2040 program. With security checkpoint being one of the most critical steps in passenger journey through the airport, I cannot wait to find out what that vision entails, especially with it being delivered by the voice of the world's airports. Billy, thank you very much for joining us today for this discussion, which will be a combination on the COVID-19 from the point of view of Airport Council International and also the program for Smart Security 2040, which is something that you, Billy, look after personally.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Before we dig into the topics for our today's episode, could you please tell me what your journey into the world of aviation was and what's your background in the passenger security in aviation?
I initially graduated from University of London in 2011. My dream job was to be a pilot, but actually I had my first flying lesson and then I didn't find it very interesting, but I always loved aviation. So I moved into outsourcing after university and did a lot of work with some airlines in outsourcing their operations from check-in to boarding agents to handling agents. So that was my first role in aviation. So I understood the basic way that airlines work. But then I had the opportunity to join London City Airport, where I was given a lot of responsibility in their security improvement programs. So looking at redesigning their target operating model. Essentially, the airport is very constrained, so they couldn't simply build more security lanes as they physically didn't have the space. So we needed to think a bit smarter on how we achieved higher levels of throughput whilst maintaining security outcomes. So this program essentially was a 3-year journey, starting off from reevaluating the passenger process through security with all of the regulatory requirements, looking at process improvement, how you can maximize efficiencies within the checkpoint whilst maintaining the government mandated security. And essentially we managed to increase the throughput from a traditional security lane, which would do about 150 passengers per hour. And we managed to get that up to about 350 during peak time operations. And London City Airport was one of the pioneers in utilising the newest technology available in the market, and it really helped drive customer experience but also operational efficiency for the airport. So using the latest technology, remote screening, body scanners, all of the parallel loading that you see that's becoming the new norm in checkpoints across the world. I then moved over into consulting for about 1.5 years with a Dutch company called 270. So I always wanted to have a stint abroad. So I led consulting assignments in security optimization at Belfast City Airport, as well as a new airport in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia for ORAT and looking at their security processes. And I'm an advocate of optimization, so I also led projects in Brussels Airport and Mexico City looking at optimization on the air side. And then I decided to take a role with ACI World because I wanted to get back into security full time. So I now lead their Smart Security program, which is essentially has 3 key pillars. So it focuses on maintaining or improving security across the checkpoints. It improves operational efficiency for airports and makes sure that costs are under control. And it really is about trying to get the best passenger experience available, so reducing queues and making the journey as seamless as possible. I've been with ACI for about 1 year now and continue to lead that program here in Montreal.
Thank you, Billy. This is really interesting. And we will come back to security matters shortly, but let us first focus on the current COVID-19 situation and ACI's role and views regarding the crisis. And we are now past a very difficult Q1, and we can already assess the impacts as well as some sort of look ahead into the remainder of the year. So having insights into the airport situation globally, what would be the key highlights on the ongoing situation?
So, aviation has faced notable shocks over its lifetime, but the fast spread of COVID-19, which has been backed up by government travel restrictions, represent a shock that has really led to a huge decrease in airport traffic, airport economic activity. It's across the whole industry, so it's not just airport focused, it's all of the companies that support aviation, so airlines, caterers, cleaning firms, and ground handlers. All of the aviation ecosystem has been widely affected. And ACI World has been really working quite closely with the World Health Organization and the International Civil Aviation Organization as the current pandemic continues to develop. International collaboration and cooperation is really what ACI is advocating. So the health and welfare of passengers, staff, and the public is of really the most paramount importance to the situation, and helping reduce opportunities for the spread of these particular diseases are priorities for the aviation industry. ACI has noted significant traffic losses up through Q1, and this will continue throughout this year, and airlines do not expect to see traffic numbers that we were forecasting this year until at least 2022-23 onwards. So ACI is advocating that any measures put in place are based on scientific evidence and medical evidence that they will help stem the flow of the virus and reduce risk for passengers. ACI advocates that all measures put in place should be risk-based and outcomes-focused, and again, based on evidence where possible. And really, screening at airports in terms of health shouldn't be done by airports. It's primarily rests with the health authorities of each particular state. But airports, airlines, and the whole aviation ecosystem does have its own role to play to help facilitate travel again and really build up consumer confidence to make sure that the industry can thrive like it was doing pre-COVID-19.
I think this is really important what you just said, as a lot of discussions are now taking place around policies that are required to tackle all the challenges that the industry is facing. However, given its unprecedented scale of this particular crisis, I think there is still little clarity on what should happen, what needs to happen, and sort of what would be nice to happen, what would be good to have in place, but may not necessarily be mandatory. And I'm just curious to learn, how does ACI support airports in this respect? Because I think you already touched on that, saying whose the role of the health screening should be, and perhaps it should be something taken away from the airports themselves.
Yeah, exactly. So all processes and measures should really be supported by medical evidence. So all processes that are deployed to validate the acceptance of a passenger or at departure or arrival should be based on medical evaluation of information and really from medical expert evidence. We don't see the need for airports to implement different types of screening where there is very little evidence to support that it's actually going to have a benefit. And we're also saying that on-airport measures for health screening should really try to be avoided as much as possible. Large-scale testing on airport sites is likely to result in the creation of crowds or queues and actually additional dwell time for passengers. So creating a large crowd or queue to have, for example, temperature screening might reassure passengers that that's the best way forward, but there's very little scientific evidence, especially when a lot of passengers or customers carrying COVID-19, for example, wouldn't actually know that they have symptoms and wouldn't have a high fever. So it wouldn't really be picked up by any of the technology available. We're also saying that measures should be risk-based and outcome-driven. So some countries or regions or routes may be considered low risk based on epidemiology, and therefore shouldn't require specific health measures. And essentially ACI is saying that coordination is key between governments, and clear communication for the travelling public is key. When measures differ by country, good coordination and clear communication to passengers is really critical to prevent passenger confusion and minimise the negative impact on passenger confidence. And we're also looking to harmonise measures between governments, and we think this will be essential to support the restoration of international operations. And I guess additionally, measures should really build consumer confidence, and they should regularly be monitored using perhaps established benchmarking surveys to ensure that they meet or exceed customer expectations. And any protective measures should be simple and practical. So social distancing, this may be available and may be possible in the short term, but will really depend on passenger volumes and terminal layouts. As the start of recovery starts happening, staggering the opening of different kiosks, different security lanes, bag drops, for example, may be possible, but it's not a long-term sustainable measure. Airports haven't designed their facilities to have a 2-meter gap in between each passenger, so measures need to be longer term, but we are saying that perhaps the wearing of PPE would be a good short-term measure. Certainly, we're recommending airports to conduct additional cleaning and sanitisation, and even in the short term to limit access to public areas, which is not essential to facilitate travel. And overall, we think measures that are implemented should be constantly reviewed for impact, suitability, and the effectiveness.
Thank you very much. I think a lot of that we'll be able to assess better once it is in place. And for me, the key takeaways from what you already touched on would be number one thing, which is obviously safety, which is the whole industry number one priority. But another one, which will be crucial to regaining the operations, is the passenger confidence. And all those measures, I'm just thinking on to what an extent they could be taken into account and even factored in the passenger experience as a standalone piece. Can we even retain a degree of that instead of just creating the environment which will be full of restrictions, which may even shout, please do this, do not do that, and then how that plays with any particular airport's passenger experience and customer strategy in a wider sense. And I also wanted to ask if there is anything about the job protection, because focusing on passengers, there's one thing, but also another piece in this whole situation would be the employment. And as we know, airports play a significant role in local economies, and something that you already said, which is the aviation ecosystem per se. So we know that from the economics point of view, there are direct, indirect, and induced effects. So I think that the job protection is another vital piece in this whole situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So both personnel employed by airport operators and those employed by outside entities represents over 6.1 million jobs globally, and the entire aviation sector makes up about 10.3 billion jobs globally. Therefore, 60% of employment in the aviation sector is generated on the ground, physically at airports. According to the Air Transport Action Group, aviation's direct, indirect, induced and tourism catalytic employment effect is in the realm of about 66 million jobs. And really, this is comparable to populations of the likes of France or the UK. And ACI is very much advocating that immediate financial assistance is required to curtail the loss of job employment. And airports really can't function without skilled and qualified employees. That said, the airport labour force goes beyond essential operations. Many employees that work at airports are actually employed by outside entities. And generally, these workers provide commercial activities such as food and beverage and retail services, aviation-related services such as ground handling, or governmental services such as border control or security. The typical hub airport, for example, will have as many as 40,000 employees, either working for the airport operator or on the airport sites. And it's really the livelihood of millions of people needs to be considered in light of the recent measures to mitigate COVID-19. There are several financial relief measures that states should consider to really alleviate the significant drop in cash flows and to ensure operational continuity of airport activities. And so ACI is looking for the immediate provision of government assistance through grants or subsidies to really support operating expenses. and mainly the wages of airport staff to safeguard the labour force and ensure continuity of airport operations in the future. So we're looking for the suspension of all national and local aviation-specific taxes, certainly for 2020, and the waiving of postponement of airport rents and concessions fees to really support the aviation economy in general. And states really need to start thinking about considering maintaining a minimum level of employment to allow continued operations and to really try to accelerate the return to full operations.
Thank you, Billy. I think we touched on some very specific points around the current situation, but I would also like to ask if there's anything that you could share with us in terms of wider ACI's strategy.
So ACI is working very strategically with ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, and the World Health Organization to really facilitate travel in the future back to recovery. So we're working a lot at senior level to try and accelerate and understand measures that might need to be put in place. We're also supporting our members. So ACI has about 2,000 member airports across the world. So our advocacy efforts on behalf of our members with local governments, global aviation organizations and regional regulators. So really trying to work at how we can facilitate travel again in the future. And we continue to work. ACI has a number of subject matter experts within, say, facilitation, within health, within security screening, and we're all kind of working together as to how we could recommend industry best practices based on practical measures to ensure that travel can remain a priority in the coming months. We're also advocating, for example, we have a slot team, we have an economics team, we have a finance team and an environmental team, which are all reuniting to really understand the different challenges that airports are facing during this COVID-19 pandemic. And so all of our subject matter experts are creating guidance for airport members and airports essentially as to how to best recover operations in the short term to regain passenger confidence, but also coming up with longer term sustainable measures based after the COVID-19 pandemic finishes.
Thank you so much, Billy, for taking time to present to us all the key activities and the role that the ACI is playing in this situation. Thank you all for listening to the first part of this interview. We hope to see you next week when we continue to talk about smart security and seamless passenger journey.